So we can collect all the numbers and the data in the world, but what does that actually mean? We can collect all the subjective information in the world, but what does it mean? The way I see it with coaching, who is to say what is right and wrong? Like, yes, there's loads of research out there. I get that, and great. I'm glad it's being done. But who is to say at that moment in time it's right or wrong? So we need to understand firstly through who they are and why they think they coach the way they do. Do they actually coach the way they do? Then when we film them and mic them up, we find out if they are actually coaching the way they think they're coaching. The coach is a researcher. For me, the coach is a researcher. So why don't we let them see that? Like, let's measure what you're doing. Let's experiment with this. Where are we taking our information from? Let's make it exciting for a coach. It's like an investigation, right? Sometimes we see teacher or lecturer as someone who holds the knowledge, and we give the knowledge over to a tutor. We give you the knowledge. Whereas maybe a researcher, you're creating an environment where we're kind of playing, we're trying to work things out. Every time we coach, I believe it's an experiment. I don't think we get player development right until we've got coach development right, if the coach is so important.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast. This week we are joined by Siôn, Rowlands, Academy Coach at Leicester City and researcher in developing and understanding coach behaviour and practice. Fascinating topic this is. Something that we haven't looked at before. We've talked a lot about tactical analysis, we've talked a lot about player analysis. We haven't talked a lot about coach analysis and how to do that at a really high level. Siôn's going to talk about a lot of detail, a lot of context-specific work on how you can evaluate and develop coaches within an environment. Fascinating topic. I love this. Before we start, please like, please subscribe, please let us know what you think in the comments below. Really appreciate all the support. Huge thank you to everyone who supported the Modern Soccer Coach end of year sale that we had. Massive response. Really appreciate it. Thanks for everything you do. Here is Siôn. Enjoy. Siôn, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really excited to chat.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me on. It's been nice getting to know you, and I can kind of see why this will be good fun. So yeah, looking forward to it.
It's a brilliant topic. You're obviously an expert in this. I struggled putting these questions together, some of them, because I thought, I wonder, is this even on topic or not? Understanding and developing coach behavior, whether my interpretation of this area is actually accurate or not. So this is a really good test for whether if I'm even on the right planet with this stuff.
Okay.
It seems that the level of feedback that players are getting isn't probably where it needs to be in terms of the video, but it's getting closer. I know in England, I think they're way ahead of where we are in America with EPPP, with video analysis and youth academy analysts, but we're doing a great job of analysing players. We don't seem to be really any further. I don't know whether 20 years ago when I was taking a coaching course and someone was standing with a clipboard and looking at me and doing without any video, I don't know how far ahead of the game we are 20 years later of coach evaluation, feedback, behavior. What's the landscape look like?
Yeah, so I can only really talk about what I know, and the clubs I know of. And you hear of different clubs doing different things, which is great. So yeah, I think it has moved on from there. Definitely has. I think it's how well has it moved on. So I do think it's moved on, and I do think we're using video more than ever. And we're miking up, so we're hearing it. We're not just watching it, we're hearing it, which is really important. And then I do know of some clubs that are analysing their coaches like they would analyse players. So I think that is happening. And it's really important that it is happening, but it's how often is it happening and how is it being used? So like anything, it's great this stuff's going on, but how are we actually using it? And I think that's what's really important here is, I'm not going to say just because you are miking up a coach and filming them, then that makes your coach development better than what you'd be doing if you weren't. However, at least you've got this information now that can help you with coach development. So yes, I think it has developed and it's improving. I think it's just how we use it. It's like anything, how do you use this thing? So we can collect all the numbers and the data in the world, but what does that actually mean? We can collect all the subjective information in the world, but what does it mean? We can have our access to all the research in the world, but how do we use it? it doesn't mean we're using it well. And I think it's really important to get that right.
Yeah, the starting point of this could potentially be objective then. There's like, what's your objective with recording and what's your objective with the feedback? Well, what could some objectives be when you're saying, okay, we're going to start to analyze coach behavior? What would an example of setting those type of objectives be?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll spin it a little bit and maybe start where I want to start, and we'll build into that. So apologies if I'm moving off that to come back on it. The way I see it with coaching, who is to say what is right and wrong? Like, yes, there's loads of research out there. I get that, and great, and I'm glad it's being done. But who is to say at that moment in time it's right or wrong? And that's where we've got to kind of say, okay, first let's work out maybe what's working in our environment, our context. And so I'm going to start even before there and say, we need to get to know the coach. Like we would be working with a player, hopefully you can work out what the coach and the player need by getting to know them. So before I would start doing any finding out objective data on a coach, really, I think it's so important that you know where the coach is coming from and where they're at. There needs to be a level of trust built. So if you look at a lot of clubs, there is a head of coaching. And I imagine the head of coaching, if they've been there for a decent period of time, has now got good relationships with their coaches. So I think that's a really good place to start. So you know your coach. I think then off the back of that, you need to know their biography, and biography plays a huge impact on how we behave. So we are often a product of our environment, right? So I coach the way I coach because these are the experiences I've had. But do I actually connect the dots? So do I realize I behave a certain way because this is what I experienced when I was playing football at 15? Maybe not. But maybe we start with that conversation of, so how do you think you're coaching? Where did this begin? What were your experiences? Because what you have to do is almost begin with questioning yourself and understanding yourself. So when we say understanding and developing coach behavior, I've got to kind of understand it. So that's me subjectively finding out about the coach and their past experiences and how they think they coach. So when we start looking at objective data, you can really code whatever you want. That's kind of, I think, on the coach, on the club and the head of coaching to decide what do we want to code and why. You could go very generic and you can use stuff that's already out there. So it might just be ball rolling time. I think it's a really important thing. And I think a lot of clubs will look at that. So that could even be done on your stopwatch, right? You don't even need someone to film it and etc. You could do that on your stopwatch. But then it might be some things where when you have this objective data, when I watch it back without the objective data, I might not notice it. But with the objective data sitting next to it, and I can see that, and I can see it on graphs, actually, I hadn't realized that 70% of my session was tactical information, not technical information. Yet I thought that session was a technical based session. So that could be one of those things, those moments that kind of hits you in the face. So I think the objective data is important, but like like when we're working with players, is it overload? Are we giving out too much? And is it an overload of information? Or should we go quite narrow and let them see it? And each coach will be different with this, like a player. So do you do almost whole part whole? Do you give them everything? And then do you narrow down and then you go back to everything to see how things have changed? So yeah, what I'm trying to say is we need to understand firstly through who they are and why they think they coach the way they do. Do they actually coach the way they do? Then when we film them and mic them up, we find out if they are actually coaching the way they think they're coaching. And we don't just have the audio and the visual, we have the objective data to see it. So it's kind of how many angles can we come at to support the coach in understanding themselves? And I think what's so important in this process is, like I said, there's quite a lot of information that could come at a coach there. So being with the coach and helping them understand what this actually means. But don't tell them. I think that the hard thing is we will have a bias. Like I'm definitely biased to a way of coaching what I believe is a right way of coaching, but I'll have a way I like to coach. And I can't go in and tell the coach this is right or wrong, I don't think, as a coach developer. I have to help the coach find out these things for themselves. So yeah, the objective data can really help with that, because it might be the punch in the face, that thing that kind of hits you. Wow, I had no idea I was doing that, which is kind of known in a lot of research. It's called as a catalyst for change. That's the moment, that wow moment. But it could come just through conversation. So what I'm trying to say is there isn't one I would do without the other. It's objective and subjective. You pull together, and it's like a mixed methods. If you're talking about research, mixed methods approach to your research, to your work. So yeah, I hope that's given you enough of an understanding on that bit.
Oh, big time. That's fascinating. The biography is a fascinating point. I always feel that, again, I probably shouldn't link things back to coach education, because we're trying to make a coach development as a process and get this into, rather than an event that's taking place or a course. We're trying to link this into week to week processes. But I always feel as if, like, when people are getting to know coaches, it's done mostly on education courses and mentorship. And they start with the why, like in a Simon Sinek way, where it's what's your why. But you're saying there is like that's not really the why of why they coach. Their story and who they are is more their why.
Yeah, it's going to have an impact, isn't it? Like who's influencing them, and like you said, coach education will play a part in that. You know, I think, like we've discussed prior to this, coach education can have a lot of shots fired at it. And I think it's sometimes a really hard thing to get right. But do I believe that national governing bodies are trying their hardest, sports governing bodies are trying their hardest to get it right? Yeah, I do. I think they are putting in the money and the effort and the time to get there. And it's, again, trial and error. You've got to work out what works. But yeah, our behaviour is based off where we've learned it. You know, why do we value a certain way of playing to another? Why do I value somebody connecting with me? Like, for example, if I were being coached and I look back to how I was coached, and what I valued was actually a coach maybe being softer with me. And I don't mean soft as in, it's easily thrown around term, isn't it? The softer approach, but actually spending time to question me and say, why were you doing this? Or, you know, I really need you to do this, and telling me and explaining it, not shouting at me. But then I do know other players when I was playing when I was younger, and players now that respond really well to the rocket up the arse kind of thing. So that's come from somewhere. We probably need to understand where that's coming from. So for coaches, they might connect some of their behaviour to coach education. Oh, well, we did this on this course. We did this on that course. But what I actually find is, more often than not, when you talk to coaches about what's had the biggest influence on them, it's people. It's not the content. It's the people they've met along the way. So I'm sure you can relate to this, and you've been on educational courses, and it's sometimes the drink afterwards. You know, when you get to the end of the day and you might go to the bar and all have a chat and have a drink, those moments possibly have a bigger influence on you than the bit itself, than the actual course and the content.
Yeah, they definitely do. They definitely do. And plus, it's when you're in those settings and you kind of see the true people, right? Because the context is social environment, how they are with staff, the restaurant or something like that. And then you're painting more of an accurate picture of. That's what I always find is, like, I get inspired by people who are genuine and really good around other people. And I think you kind of get a more accurate assessment of that personality, which makes you think, if I want to get to that level, I have to be a better person around social settings, so to speak. I don't even know that word.
No, I hear you on that. You kind of like we've touched on previously, the imposter syndrome, right? So you go into these places, and maybe then when you're on a course, you behave differently to how you would, because the environment's different, context is different, people around you are different. More often than not, you might not be coaching your players, you might be coaching other coaches that are on the course. So yeah, you definitely change, don't you? We can't help but change. And I think you mentioned then that authenticity there and true selves. So when we link that back then to coach development, is what is our true self as a coach? And sometimes I think maybe it's a really hard place to know who you are as a coach, because there is a way you believe you should behave as a coach. There's a performance, right? Front of stage, we behave this way. Are we performing that way because we think that's what the club wants from us? And I think on one of your other podcasts, we talked about parents, the impact of parents expecting you to behave a certain way. And I think that's definitely there. And also, if you see a coach, whether it's right or wrong, in the age groups above, and you perceive growth in your career is going up the age groups, and you see such and such behaving one way, you might think, I've got to mimic them to be more like them to progress. But what we have got to reflect on there is actually maybe that behavior is more fitting to an older age group than it is to a younger age group. But to get to that authentic place, like you just mentioned, is we have to firstly create an environment where we feel completely safe as a coach. And I suppose to link that back to the coach development side of it, the coach first of all needs to know who they are. So trace their biography and let's get some understanding of what might, because you and I just talking, you actually, whilst we're talking, we're reflecting, we're kind of, oh, really, I didn't know that, or okay, I hadn't seen that in what I'm doing. And even more so if you were watching me as a coach. But that moment of knowing yourself and what impacts you, and then seeing your behavior objectively, seeing it through video, hearing it back, and then subjectively having understanding of your coaching. So, for example, you might ask the players, what did you think of the session? It might not be me asking it might be my co-coach. My co-coach might help me reflect. But these multiple angles we come from, and if we do it more and more often, then you become comfortable, and there might be more chance of you being authentic because I'm okay with all this stuff going on around me because this is just normal. It's not because I'm getting through a course. This is just me getting better, and this is my way of reflecting and becoming better.
Again, I go back to how my coaching days and how I perceived it, and coming up from a different generation where it was very top down. But then I always think, well, this should be a better generation, or should be a more a different type of space. These environments should be different today because it's a different generation of people. But then I look and think, most people are, again, just an opinion, coach how they were coached when they start. And then they bring out, again, those kind of environments that, like the top coaches, you put a sprinkle of pep into your personal experience, and all of a sudden you land in doing what the last generation does. So I guess, how do you think the education piece around, that top-down approach and trying to lead in a more, like, it looks great on a Steve Kerr clip or an Arteta clip on Amazon. It looks great, but how do you open a little bit of awareness for a young coach around there's a different way to behave, there's a different way of doing that if there's not best practice right next to them or experience right next to them?
Yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? You've just nailed it. And I think, how do we learn? How do a lot of us learn? If we take our information from social media, which is kind of hard to ignore, right? Unless you delete it and don't go on it. But I think it can also add value if you use it well. That's hard in itself. But say you're right, you go on there and you see so much stuff is on analysis, right? And you can see a clip of Pep speaking in the changing room. I'm trying to think of when you watch the documentaries when Arteta speaks the way he does in the changing room, so much passion and fire. Well, hold on, do I really want to go in there and hit a tactics board near an under 13? Like, probably not. Some of them might find it quite funny and be entertained. But yeah, that's probably not the way I need to be behaving. And also, if you're doing that all the time, do the players even take notice? Oh, it's just Siôn being like that again. It's just Siôn doing this again. So does it really have an impact? I think for any coach now, you've got so many different streams and sources of information coming at you, like I said, but we're probably looking at snippets more often than not, aren't we? Because of social media, everything's shorter. So the videos we might watch might be 20 seconds or maximum 2 minutes. And I think people probably switch off. So we need to, I think the best way is you have to let the coach see themselves. And then by seeing themselves, like I said, in the different methods, they then might see something that they connect with or think, I actually would like to change that. Or I see something I really like and I'd like to develop that more. But as a coach developer, and I don't just say as a coach developer, but what we surround the coaches with, or could we share a little bit more research so it's research backed? And I'm not saying research has all the answers. Please don't think I am, because again, when you dig deeper into research, sometimes it's not done in context. It's done with 2 or 3 players, and then we try and generalize it across everyone. But can we help them digest it? Can we help people understand the research? And I also think, from my experience of working with coaches, they can read academic papers. I think we have this belief that somebody think, oh yeah, they won't read that. They won't read. Well, I think they will. Sometimes academic papers are hard to read, right? And they're not always the nicest to. But maybe there's a bit in between where national governing bodies, sports governing bodies, I think they are, coach developers, heads of coaching, all these people are breaking down the research and giving it to the coaches. But even better, and I suppose I'm kind of going off topic, so apologies, the coach is a researcher. For me, the coach is a researcher. So why don't we let them see that? Like, let's measure what you're doing. Let's experiment with this. Where are we taking our information from? Let's make it exciting for a coach. It's like an investigation, right? If I do this, this is what happens, but it means I might lose this. And the more of that we can do and make that happen within their environment, the better. So if I am just solely trying to develop myself without any support, I might lean towards Twitter, X, to get my information off, right? I might go on YouTube to watch videos. But the fear of doing that is I'm going to repeat practices that others have done without really them applying to my context. And that's a worry. So what we need to do is make the coach fully aware of their own context and their own behavior and what they're doing. And then that critical piece of, does this actually apply to what your world? So if you're going to go and do that, great, but does it actually fit? And if it does fit, how might you measure the impact of it? So sorry, I did go off on a tangent, I think, with you there, but I think it's that for any coach to improve now, like it's always been, it's quite tough because there's so much information out there. And yes, we probably do just recycle traditions. But I think more than ever now, we have access to more and more. How I said we can film, how I said we can code, how I've said we can do all that. We probably didn't have that option 10 years ago, maybe. So now, even if you look at your grassroots clubs, I imagine they have VO cameras and different things. So they can set up, you can record through your phone, you can mic yourself up through your phone, and you can be filming off your VO. And through whatever program you use, you can match your audio up with your visual. And now at least I can watch myself back. So whether we take our information from a Twitter or whatever it might be, does it really work? Does it apply to our world? Let's measure it and see if it does.
I love that piece on researcher over teacher. It was in questions as well, because I think, and I've thought of this a lot, because you said it in our other conversation we talked, and I think the teacher element in using education, a lot of it's come in the US. This has come in where make the environment more educational. But I like my 7-year-old and my 9-year-old don't want to go to school anymore. It's too boring. So why would I want to create an environment that could have so much joy in it? Whereas the researcher, so like by the way, I think my kids' teachers are stars in my eyes. Like anyone puts up with kids on a long-term basis, so like unbelievable. So it does, like, I don't want to be teachers, but I think teachers present you as this, I have the voice of soccer. I'm going to teach you everything you want to know. And I think the researcher, just by framing that, leads you to think, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to try and get more information about this. I think that's way more powerful. Am I wrong in that there and thinking that could be detrimental?
And I kind of get where you're going. I think what you mean with it is like sometimes we see teacher or lecturer as someone who holds the knowledge, and we give the knowledge over to a tutor, we give you the knowledge. Whereas maybe a researcher, you're creating an environment where we're kind of playing, we're trying to work things out. But it takes a very brave club, head of coaching, or an environment to allow you to be that, I think. So, for example, it might be And I said to you, I don't want to get dragged into how you should or shouldn't coach, because I think there's people that are far more skilled than I to discuss those things. But you might be trying a new way of coaching. And how do I know if it's working or not? And that's the researcher, right? So I've seen this, and I think this could work with the group I'm working with. Okay, so how might we measure that? Right, so we've already said we could film, we could mic, and we can check in on your behaviours, that you are actually behaving the way you think you want to behave, or you said you're going to behave. Because to firstly get things right, more often than not, if you look at the research, coaches lack self-awareness. And it's a really hard thing to get. So, and I'm a coach as well, so I'm not saying that as if I'm firing shots at coaches. I'm the same. I lack self-awareness, and it's hard to get right. So the video and the other things around it can really help us. But the researcher bit is, I think, quite exciting, because if we're in an environment where we can share what we're doing, so it might be for a meso, I'm going to work on this style of play. And what I can do at the end of the meso is I might work with the analysis department if we're lucky to have that. I might work with the psych department if we're lucky to have that. And how might they help us measure this? Okay, so we can measure it through analysis, but we might use psych to go and speak to our players. For example, if we've been trying a new way of playing, I might think it's working greatly because I'm seeing things that I like. My bias is seeing it. And naturally, you know, when you try something, you want to be decent at it. So, oh, yeah, I've been doing this with the players and you can see it's paying off. And, okay, maybe it is or isn't. And sometimes by eye, you can tell that. But just imagine you could create part of that experiment in this research environment is that other members of staff are part of it and they can go and speak to the players. And the players can even be involved in this. Well, what did you think to that last session? How did this impact what we're doing going forwards? How I don't think you should be seen as, you know, like coach is king. That was a thing and I'm not saying we move away from coach making big decisions, but it's okay to get it wrong. It's okay that we make mistakes. It's okay that we're trying something and we're not really getting it right, and there's failure in this, because the failure could equal growth. But the environment we create is so important to everyone really seeing that this is okay. And if a coach can be positioned as a researcher in the fact that researchers don't know everything, and I think that's what's quite nice, is research tries to build on previous research to expand on it. So as a coach, can I always look to develop my last practice? Can I look to develop what we've been doing? And like we touched on earlier, and it's been mentioned previously, it's like, poor man's
blanket. Yeah, poor man's blanket. Yeah.
So it's exactly that, right? So I know by doing this as a coach, I might lose out on this. But just because I've said that, it doesn't mean that actually happens. So that's why I'm saying we need to measure it. But if everyone involved understands this is being measured and this is what we're trying out, even the parents, and I think this is a really critical part of it as well. If you're, like we said, you might change your performance as a coach because you think you've got to appease the parents. But just imagine your parents understood, look, for the next meso, so for the next 8-10 weeks, whatever it might be, we're going to work on these things. And yeah, to you guys, it might look a bit odd. I get that, because it's not the traditional way of coaching or what you're used to seeing. But we think this might be what we get from it. And so we need to create coach developers, and in our environment of a club, where everyone is kind of involved. That's not me saying everyone has the power or the influence to change what you're doing. So I think that's really important as well. You can't have too many chefs. But this is the direction we're going on, and we would love for you to be part of that and understand it. And how do our departments link in and help us measure it? But then also, how do the parents help support it? And all of this is doing now is creating an environment where, as a coach, I feel like, I can actually go and experiment. So if I've said for the next 8 weeks, my meso, I'm actually going to use a less direct instruction, and I'm actually going to lean towards questioning. So a lot of my work is going to be based around questioning, and I don't want to be interrupting play, so I want ball rolling to be high. So these are the things you might see from me as a coach and what I'm trying to work towards. But then there's that bit within that, and you say to the players, the coaches, the people you're working with, once we've started doing this, I want to measure it because this is my experiment. And when I start measuring it, so for example, I've just said in there that I might use more questioning. Okay, so I can see my questioning because I'm coding it. I can see my questionings raising. I'm using more questions. Great. well, now let's look at the questions, because if I'm just asking you what you had for dinner every 5 minutes, that's not really beneficial. So then we can start digging a little bit deeper into the quality of the questioning and the context in which it's used in. So there's a lot going on there, but every time we coach, I believe it's an experiment. It's just we've got to phrase it and see it like that, as opposed to I should know best. I have all the knowledge. I know what will make you into a pro footballer. Do I? Do I really know what will make you into a pro? Yes, I may have seen several players come through a club where I've worked, but is it what I've given you has made you a pro footballer? Or actually, did you learn that when you're playing football with your mates outside of it? Or is it just the fact you've been playing against really good players all your life that you just so happen to become a pro footballer? So what we can control is that I can probably measure some of the stuff that's going on around you, and I'm intentionally doing this to see what might happen back. And we'll reflect on it in 10 weeks' time, and we'll all have an opinion. And we can even ask the parents what they thought. But I just think we have to explain that we don't think we know everything. We are researchers, we're experimenting, and we can all be part of that.
It opens my eyes to just a different world. I thought, why did I not think that that had so much value? That the more I look at this space where how do you really grade the quality of coaching? And that's like, now I'm in the youth space. I do ask that quite a bit where I go to a game or I go to practice, and I kind of moved away from the believing that the coaching conference style of coach was, stop it 3 times.
Yeah.
Really good communication. Like, what really is good coaching? And then can you really improve coaching? Like, okay, so an innovative club wants to really invest in this and commit to this. But then as someone, with so much finances and everyone's looking for an ROI on everything in today's world, is anyone or does someone have to say, well, how do we gauge the success of assessing the coach behavior over a period of time?
Yeah, it's, again, so it probably goes a little bit deeper. So I'd like to say I get to work at a club which has a brilliant environment for this. So I think I'm very lucky to have that. And what is good coaching is really subjective. There might be some solid things we can state, right? There might be some solid things, but as I said, I'm not going to get caught up in saying what I think is good coaching. But the way we can definitely help a coach and get along that journey is by supporting them in understanding what they're doing, right? Like I've kind of gone over, I'm sorry, I probably sound like a broken record with it. But then we can actually start saying, well, is this good coaching or not, based on what we think is good coaching? So if I want to try a certain behavior with this group of players, why do I want to try it? So that might be where research comes in. And we can find some research out there, some literature that tells us this might be beneficial for this, this, and this. And some literature is really good in the fact that it will tell you what you do lose. But some literature probably might guide you away and disguise the stuff you do lose, which is okay. That's how it works. But then you can almost go, well, having read this, I'm going to go and try this. Okay, let's go and try it. And then you start to say, well, does this fit in with the club? Is this what the club promotes or not promotes? So there might be a culture to the club and the behaviour and the way we want to do things as a club. But again, you'd hope that's backed by something. What is it that has made you decide this is what good coaching looks like? So when I was quite a bit younger, I did my master's and I was doing it at Everton. So I sat with players from under 12s up and 4 players from each age group. And I asked them what makes a good coach. And I thought, because this is quite an open thing, it was a master's, I didn't need to go too heavy on it. And I was fortunate to be coaching somewhere I had this access. And I kind of thought that certain things would come back. But I remember getting to 18s and 21s, and their comments were, I love it when the coach gets after me. Like, if the coach goes after me and really, scolds me, goes for me, it makes my game jump up, and I need that sometimes. And I was gobsmacked. But my thought was, well, have you been conditioned to get to this point? Is that something? And I'm not saying that's just to Everton, by the way. That's me saying, do you get conditioned to expect a behaviour which you believe you feel you need to be better? But that surprised me. So if we go down the route of, oh, no, we don't need to behave like that with our players, how do we know? How do we actually know that, like we kind of discussed, having good connections with your players, you would imagine helps, right? And there's a lot of research and psychology that says, oh, the connections, whether that be 4Cs, 5Cs, going down that route. And there's been measurements of that. But some of the players might not actually care if we've got a connection. So what is good coaching and what is bad coaching? We'll have some idea of that. But what we use in our different contexts with our players, and everybody's an individual, is really important. So just because one coach likes to receive a certain behaviour, it doesn't mean that's going to work with the one next to them. So you might find one player responds really well to questions. You might find that someone just needs to be left alone. You know, it might be that they enjoy the questions during the session. It might be actually they're better after the session, post-session, you do it as a bit of analysis. Or what were you thinking here? But the thing we've got to start doing is trying to work out what do the players want, what's best for them. And that could change season by season, age by age, right? Because what you might enjoy as an under 12, if you try and treat me like that when I'm under 16, not a chance. But how are we measuring this? How do we know? So I think rather than say there is a good or bad way of coaching, and I said there is probably clear things we can say are good and bad, but not to get dragged into that, is how do the players respond to it? And are we actually doing it in the way we thought we were? So if I perceive good coaching to be less ball rolling time, more technical based practice, all these kind of things we can say, go and measure it and prove that you're doing it. Because I'd imagine it's not going exactly how you thought it was. And then what is good coach development is if a coach is improving on something they said they wanted to improve on. Well, that's great, isn't it? Like they're actually improving on what they said they wanted to. But if they're not, it's still not to say the coach is a bad coach. It's actually say, well, maybe we need to spend a little bit longer on this and identify why it is you're finding it so hard to change his behaviour. But like I said earlier, we need to first know what we're doing. And I think that's probably where we miss it a little times, is we don't know what we're already doing.
Yeah, definitely do, because you do need to, like, there's so many different personalities of coaches. There's different paths. There's different, then they're in the different context of age groups and settings. So you're never, like, the more I listen to this, the more I'm, again, trying not to just say, let everyone go and do what they need to do. Like, I don't want, like, I'm a process person. I want to stick with processes. But at the same time, it opens your eyes. This is a really complex world. So going back to, like, okay, how would clubs implement this? And I think, again, I hear today a lot of clubs are trying to say, okay, let's get a bit more information on coaches, personality tests, which is under a different context, but is still research based. Like, does that give you a better start for a coach?
So again, it's probably an area, so our psych department will do stuff around that. And again, I think it's just more information that could possibly help us. And I think they'll probably say that as well. You know, this isn't the way we must do it, but it's a way that can help us do it. So, you know, when you said you look for a process, I think all of this is a process, but the process changes depending on the coach. So as a coach, like you would with a player, is like, I might change your position a little bit as a player. I might ask different things of you because that's going to get the development we want from you. So when you're saying like personality styles or traits, when we go down that route, is my only fear with everything we do, and I don't just set the personalities, this is who I am. Well, no, it's not. You can change who you are. This is just what we're seeing, right? This is what we've taken from this bit of information, and it can give us some understanding. But what we can do is we can start combining all these information sources to give us a more rounded picture, hopefully. But like with anything, Gareth, if I were to come and watch one session of you and try and tell you I knew you as a coach by you've done this test, I've coded you here, and that's one session, that's nothing. But if I was to do that over a season, you've got all this information and we can follow you, like we might track a player's development. You know, we do a speed test, strength tests, all these kind of things. We can do the same with our coaches. And if you're wanting a process, like I said, you might use the same process with every coach to begin with, but then you tailor your process depending upon what the coach wants. So what works, like I said, with one coach might not work with the other. But I think what's the other thing I think that's very important in this is that the coaches aren't sitting in separation from one another. Like if what I'm working on, I should then be able to, and I think this is so important, if I'm trying to change something, I should present that back to the other coaches and say, this is what I've been working on. And because when I present that back, you might go as another coach, wow, that's really powerful. Like I can see why you're working on that. Or you might even say, do you know what? Having watched your clips and seen what you've been developing, I actually really like the way you're doing it previously. And then we're all already developing something there, right? We're collaborating to understand what we've been doing. And then from that, you might go, oh, right, that was really good. Or that was something I might develop. So I think if we can, as coaches, not be kept on our own lane, we can work across one another, how your co-coach works with you. These things, it's more information sources and you're sharing that information more, but it's still a process. You're just changing the process and how we do it.
Yes, flexibility. How many podcasts have I done where we're talking about flexibility with systems and tactics, and you're doing flexibility with the coaching styles, coaching behaviors, because there's got to be a trap in this that with the coach behavior or someone ahead of coach assessment is going to look at, say, okay, you have to do this because that's what we do here.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be clubs, isn't there, that have a set way of how they want the coach to behave. They might have set practices they want the coach to use. There's definitely going to be that, and I'm am I sitting on the fence a little with that? I don't think this is what you've got to try. It's not my battle to have. You know, if I were head of coaching, then it's my battle to have, right? This is what I believe works in player development. But I don't think we get player development right until we've got coach development right, if the coach is so important. But as I said earlier, a player might just get through whether they've got a good or bad coach. They're just good players. So I think the more information we can pull from, the better, which again gives us a broader picture of who we're working with, the coach we're working with. And then again, you might align that to how you do it at a club. You might have a style of coaching at a club that you value more. So like we said, it might be that the questioning is quite an easy one to keep using, right? So I'll follow that pattern of, I like you as a coach to use a lot of questions. I don't want you to be directive. I don't want you to tell them what they need to do. I want you to question them to try and find out what they do. Okay, well, that's what we're going to look at. And it's quite simple then, isn't it? And then we can go down the route of looking at that. I think there is so much we could look at. And again, I think maybe an easier way to understand this is when you're doing your analysis of your team and your analysts are coding, maybe it's possession. Let's just say it's possession. Why are we having possession? Is that really important to us as an academy? Or if we're keeping loads of possession, does that actually mean we're not taking many risks? So what is it we're coding this for and why are we coding it? And then how does that align with who we are? So again, it kind of comes back to understand yourselves. What do you want from this? Why are we collecting this information? You know, we shouldn't be obsessed with data. It should just be something that helps us make informed decisions.
You made me think there when you were saying if you went and watched me in one practice, you wouldn't get a full accurate representation of the type of coach I am. But I actually had someone, and I tell this story quite a bit when I'm talking to coaches, is I had someone in 2016, Donna Fichter, who works over here, works with teams, very, very collective based, but comes in, spends a few days, does presentations on culture in front of people. Like I've never seen anyone impact a room. Super, super impressive. But she also has an add-on where she's like, I'll also look at you and see, you know, if you want some feedback. And I was like, yeah, we'll see how that goes, you know. And oh my God, that I learned things about myself. I mean, she had the, you know, when she was leaving her to the airport, I was thinking, I'm just going to drop her off here. And she's like, let's get a coffee and let's chat. She pulled the notebook. The one I remember was, you know, formally, your communication is really good formally, but informally, it's atrocious. And I was like, oh wow, she hit me really hard with it, and I thought, what do you mean by that? And then the notebook came out, opened up, such and such said hello to you, and I was like, yeah, I said hello back. and super defensive to start with. And then she's like, yeah, but you went and put cones down, and she wanted to talk about something, and then there's 100 of these examples. She's only there for 2 days. But what I'm going to ask you is my initial, first off, like I really appreciated someone being honest with me. And I think in today's world, that's something that, again, I think people are going to eventually want that, because there's a lot of, hey, that's good, well done, keep it going.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that, I would have been really, really defensive to start that. Like, my reaction was, no. So how would a coach who's going down this road is probably going to find some resistance with people that they're delivering feedback to, and how do they overcome that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think I experienced that when I first started doing the work. Was information such as this, if you were to code a coach, it could have been used as a stick to beat them. Oh, you're not doing this isn't good enough, But I think, and this depends on who you are and your role within the club and the value people have in you to do that. So if you're a researcher like I was and am, and the stuff I do is kind of like, well, I'm not the head of coaching, so why would this person listen to me? Like, I don't dictate anything here. I'm just here supporting you. So for me, it was very much, I'm just going to work with you. Like, use me however you want. I'll coach beside you. I'll feed balls in, whatever I have to do for us to have some trust, because the trust has to be built. Without that trust, and there's nothing, it's kind of like, you might hear this information. If I was honest with you when you trust me, you're more likely to accept that honest information, rather than if you're just somebody coming in, telling you you're wrong and then disappearing. And then even better if you can have examples of it, which I think was what happened for you in that moment, right? You were told it, and you're a bit like, whoa, hey, I did say hi back. Why are you after me a bit? But then you can show that, as Donna you mentioned could show, actually, well, this is what happened, and then you can go, oh wow, I didn't know that. So it's backed up by something. So it's not just an opinion. There's actually this to support it. But I think for me, the biggest point was, and the point still is I'm not here to tell you off. Like, it's actually, I've noticed this. So when there was some coaches I work with, when I can say, I've noticed this. It's up to you what you do with it. But I think one thing that was a really important thing that happened to me was having both the head of coaching and my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, say to me, you're offering your opinion a lot here. And they were like, you're meant to be helping the coach go and do this for themselves. So if we really want them to take ownership of their learning, but you're telling them, is that really happening? So what you need to do is spark the enthusiasm for the coach. And I think all coaches want to get better, I imagine, because it's what they're doing. But yeah, you're right. There might be that honesty piece, but who delivers that and how that's delivered is probably the skill, isn't it? So sometimes is it that you need to deliver that, or do they maybe need to see somebody else doing it? And they, oh, wow, that person's doing it a little bit differently. So if we were, say for yourself, working in a club, and you recognize one coach doesn't do something that you'd like them to do a little bit more, but one coach does it really well, could you pair them? Could you say, actually, I want you two to work together on a few things and see how it comes out? And you don't even need to say, I'm wanting you to get better at this, and that's why I've paired you with this person. It might just be it makes sense to pair you two together. You might be working on the same thing, which helps you. It feels like you're sharing the journey with someone. So that giving the feedback's tough. And I think one thing I've realized is whenever we do any of our coaching stuff, like our meetings, we call them coaching cells, is it tends to be around a round table if we can, or we have a big square table we sit round. And every meeting starts with food. So there's a really good coffee shop near me that does all its own like baked goods. So we always try and get to there before we have a meeting. And it sounds minor, right? But if we're already sharing food and enjoying ourselves, then there's probably more chance I can say something about what I noticed in your coaching or what you noticed about my coaching. Because if everything's such a formal thing, does it really need to be? It can be quite informal to begin with. It can be relaxed. And again, this is how you build an environment. where we feel comfortable in sharing. But I don't think this happens overnight. I think this is something that happens over a season and seasons, where you become more and more comfortable with each other. But I'm going to backtrack on it and say that comfort can also be debilitating, maybe, because then you become scared of saying something. That's why I'm trying to put out the fact that the coach needs to become critical of their own behaviour. They need to reflect on what they're doing. So as a coach developer, you've got to sometimes maybe nudge them. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that? But I still don't think it ever needs to be a stick. You don't ever need to beat them with anything or have a go at them.
Brilliant, brilliant. Is there, see, on that reflection piece, is there a formal, is it helpful for coaches to have a formal review reflection in place just constantly, or do you think that could be more informal, where they're thinking in the car, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think there needs to be, I think it's quite nice, isn't it, to have a formal thing with a head of coaching or whoever might be your, whether it's the lead phase, whoever that might be, who sits with you and actually gives you feedback. Because again, as long as they give you reason, their backing of why they're giving you that feedback, I'm okay with that. And I think most people are. It's just, if I ask you a question back and say why, and you've got nothing to support that, then okay, well, I'm not really going to value what you're saying too much. But again, I would say I'm in an environment where I value what people are saying to me, and I think there's always a good reason for them saying it. So I class myself as lucky to have that. And then there's the informal side, which is just conversations around the side of the practice. Like I'd say we're quite lucky in the fact we go and watch each other's practices quite a bit if time allows. Different coaches will come into your practice. The lead coach, the lead phase will come in and out of your practice. And we talk about players, we talk about practice design, but this only comes, I think, because every other week we might have a meeting where we're talking about something. So it doesn't have to be on a specific topic that we're working on this. We might be. But by already building an environment where we're already talking and sharing ideas, then why does that change if I'm out beside you on the field? And then it could just be questions, right? Or what are you going after tonight? All this kind of stuff. And depending on who your co-coach is, or with my co-coach for my last two, we're always on the phone to each other. So what did you think to this? Okay, we'll ask the analysts and see what they got from it. I think if you build an environment, like I said, with researchers, if we build an environment where we're naturally reflecting, informal works, but that's more often, right? But I do think you need these solid bits. Like I know for us, it might be that we have to present back on what we've been doing in the last meso. So there's a bit of formality there, isn't there? There's a reflective bit. And then when we're reflecting and presenting that, and we present back to the other coaches and they ask you questions, you've got to have the answers. I think you should. And if you don't have the answers, then great, because now I've got to go out and find out why I was doing that. And then once you've done that, what are you going to do next meso? Okay, so now I'm going to expand on what I've done as the researcher. So I think you need the formality and informal process, but you also, like I said, and sitting on the fence, but it's going to change who you're working with. Some coaches may hate the formal side and some may love the informal. Am I best sitting down having lunch with you and discussing it, or do you rather phone me on your way home? Because I know you actually finish work as early as you can because you live 2 hours away and you want to get back to see your kids. Am I best eating into your time when you're in the club and we do this reflection, or is reflection best for you when you're driving home? So many different things we have to look at in this, but I do think there needs to be formality. There still needs to be a formal process to what we're doing because, like you said earlier, I do think process is important. And the formal side feels sometimes a bit more proper, doesn't it? So you're like, yeah, I'm going through this. But the informal side, work out what works for them.
Hugo Vicente he presented for us. He was at Braga and Benfica, a few academies. He'd done a presentation last month on AI, the role of AI, and he talked about just going and putting your thoughts on a voice memo, dropping it in for 6 months would blow your mind. Yeah,
definitely. But the thing is, our conversations, it's so much easier now to record them, isn't it? And have this stuff collected. We can be writing notes, we can be doing whatever it is, but I think what he pointed out to you there is collecting it. and then you go back and look at it. Sometimes do we collect this information? Like, how do we compare where we're at now to where we were at? That's where I'm saying, if we start with coach development, we need to be grabbing this data. It's not just we're just doing it for the sake of, let's just have a conversation. It's, well, let's reflect back on this. Like you said, in 6 months will probably blow your mind. And I think the same for coaches. You know, when they see their practice from 6 months ago, they look at it now. Okay, I've come on a lot, or nothing's changed. So that, yeah, and I think with AI, it can only get easier, right? Yeah. But with AI, so for example, what I do, if I'm to code a practice, I have to watch the practice to code it. You might use AI to code your practice because we're going that way. But without watching the practice back, I'm missing the nuances within the practice. So just because I can say, if I put this information, to say I audio recorded my session and we put that through AI, and it can break down all my behaviors within it, because it can probably do that. It's probably got the intelligence to do it. But I don't know how they were delivered, how they were said, who it was said to. Were you looking at the player when you said it? There's all these nuances that we're going to miss just by using AI. But at least we're beginning to collect something, rather than it's too big a mountain, let's not bother trying to climb it. So I'm saying, yes, you could probably use it, this way of collecting data and using AI, but you will miss stuff if you're not going into your session and looking at these moments, because that's so important.
Like the piece that you talked about bringing in the pastries and getting people sharing and setting the tone in the culture of being open, building that like rapport, trust. I think that's really, really important. Even whenever you're giving feedback, another challenge, right, is like giving feedback can be difficult. You talked about maybe having the reports. You're so close to someone, you don't want to say, and there's obviously a power dynamic sometimes. So sometimes you have to think in those environments about whether you want to tell someone what you think.
Yeah,
it can be difficult as well.
Yeah, and again, there's probably where there's sometimes you recognize that if you were to say it, it's not going to land well. But it doesn't have to be just you saying it. It could be where you work with somebody else to say it. You might be working with their co-coach. You know, it doesn't have to be necessary, because if, for example, I think a good point here is to say who you coach with will impact how you coach. So one thing that I've noticed massively through the research was that my behavior might be a certain way, but I'll tell you, a lot of it is based off how my other coach is behaving. But we don't consider that, because we don't do coach education based with the coach we're working with. Coach education quite often sits and stands alone. And again, this is like, how do you evolve coach education? That's quite big, right? Okay, maybe you should be going through it together if you're both coaching together. So, for example, you know, like the advanced youth, that might be really a clever thing to do, that if I was to sit through the advanced youth with my co-coach, so we're both sitting at the same time, because if I try and do something but their behavior goes against what I'm trying to do, it's just going to cancel it out. So what I'm trying to say is, you might not be the best person to deliver the message, but there's enough people around you, and if you're in an environment where people trust you and think, actually, you're not doing this to stab someone in the back, you're just doing it to help them improve, then that's great as well, right? The more people involved, the better, I think. So
I think that it's going to move in that direction, Sean. Like I think that people are looking for a little bit more. I think now a lot of coaches are disengaged, in maybe overworked, a lot of pressure at every level, but I think kind of disengaged by the X's and O's, and want a little bit more of a, maybe it's just the culture of, individualization from their standpoint. Do coaches need IDPs? But I think coaches, one, will need more support in the next 5 years, of someone saying, hey, I've been there, like, hang in there. And two, I think they'll value someone that's actually can give them a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak, of say, like, listen, have you tried this here? Where do you think, where do you think in the next 5-10 years, do you think the landscape will shift to, with AI coming in and going to bombard us with even more information?
I think what you said, coaches need IDPs, that's definitely happening. You know, coaches are having their own IDPs, their development plans is there. They'll get, depending on who's doing them, that'll be interesting, because I've said it, I think a lot of this stuff you quite often have to put in place for auditing purposes. But it doesn't mean that you're doing them overly well. So again, let's, that. But I think more and more is going to get, look how much money is spent on coach development. It's huge. What the Premier League do, what the FA do, it's huge. And they're really investing time, and they've got brilliant people working within the organisations, like really skilled practitioners. So it can only, you imagine, get better, because it's naturally going to grow. But the fear of the AI, like I mentioned earlier, is it can probably do more with the stuff. We can put more stuff into it, and it can give us more information back. But the real skill is being within the practice and understanding what's going on in there. So I think everything needs to be context specific. I think it will grow. It can only grow. Everything just keeps evolving. But sometimes, like you said earlier, when you go big, you sometimes miss quantity over quality, right? And we really need to keep quality in there. And like I said earlier, the hard thing for coach education is we have to deliver it, or it has to be delivered to so many people. So you almost have to standardize it somehow, don't you, to keep it fair and equal, you'd say. But what I'm kind of going against that and saying, and I'm not trying to attack coach educators, because that's a really tough job, is it has to be based on the person, not the content. But the content is what you start with. And for a coach educator, maybe they're working for the FA, whoever it might be, I have to deliver this because this is the content I have to deliver. And then we almost have to assess you somehow, because that's only fair that we check that you've taken some of this on board. So by using AI, yes, it might help us take on more information, but does it just become more and not specific to the individual? Are we just able to collect more, like with analysts now, with our coding for our players? Are we just coding lots of information that actually has no relevance to what we're trying to do with our players, our individual players or our team? And it's the people in between that will still be the glue within that and say, and they're the real skilled people in saying, okay, this is kind of pointless, or no, let's keep going with this because there's a reason for this. This might be long term. So if we collect this data, it's going to give us this in the future. But what do we need right now? And I think that's dependent upon the person, not the methods we use. Like AI or whatever we start using. It's why are we doing it? What's the purpose? It'll always come back to that. And why are we doing it?
You've subtly, initially going into this space, and I think, again, this is just my opinion, but going into this space and preparing for this, you're thinking of, again, the analysis in me, the process in me is thinking day to day. You sit now, you go through the videos, you go through the mic'd up, you get metrics on this, you KPIs on that. But what I think you've subtly chipped away at the whole way is to be like, okay, the context of how you deliver it and where you place yourself more in the center and then work around people is almost allows you then to build the relationship, which then allows you to get closer to the person, to impact the person, alongside then the analysis and the daily kind of soccer tech processes. Seems like that allows you then to stay on track with goals and objectives and keep that clear in the front of where you're trying to go, rather than approaching it from where I thought was going to be, which if you approach it from, again, scale it, get all out there, go into it without those other pieces in, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, completely. And I think this might be the issue. With the phrase has been used, laptop coaches. They're good behind a laptop, but not really good at the delivery side. And I think that's still the case. And you can say that with doing this form of analysis, is you could easily just sit behind a laptop clicking a button. And I don't know how other clubs do it, so I can't speak for other clubs. And I know there are other clubs that do it, but they might have just a set analyst do this. And I'm not saying that analyst does or doesn't know anything. I don't know the analysts. I can't talk for them. But I do know that none of this would work, I don't think, if I wasn't able to coach. I'm not, so probably maybe I should have started with it saying, like, my background, I don't class myself as an academic. I just so happened to be fortunate to have done a PhD in something I loved. So it allowed me to be passionate. And I think once you have a passion, you get better at it because you won't quit. Like at school, I stayed on an extra year to make sure I got the grades so I could go to university. I messed up at uni 2 years running. You know, I've not had this perfect,
Really?
Honestly, I've not had a linear passage. My mates will always batter me still for this kind of stuff. And now, because I've just done a PhD, bloody ocean, you're still in education. You're that stupid. You need to stay in education. Honestly, the abuse I've had off them, but I've just enjoyed it. And I think my coaching has always been my love. Like, I think it's where I feel I am best is when I am coaching. But you realize there's a lot more going on around the coach than just coaching. And you see that in every club you work at. And I've been fortunate to work at quite a few now, whether that be from no category status to Cat 1. I've been really lucky to meet different people along the way. And along the way, you're like, well, I didn't behave like that with that person. I didn't behave like that with that person. And then you fall into this position, and I say fall, but yes, I did push for it. The PhD I've just done. For example, I heard one of the students at UCFB said, I was told that I would hate it at Loughborough University because it's full of loads of stuck-up people. And I thought, whoever's told you that is so far wrong. They shouldn't be saying that. But equally, that's not true. And I think sometimes we have a perception that academics are these well-written snip, and it's not. I don't think that's the case. Yes, that might be the case for some, but let's not pretend that there's some coaches that are a certain way as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I say a coach might believe if their background has had nothing really to do with academia, they didn't enjoy school. I hated school. So why have I done a PhD and it's only because I've found a passion and I love it. Why are we a coach? Because it's my passion and I love it. I don't think people coach for the money unless they're first team, right? So what we should be doing, and this is why I say all of this, is I think anyone can go ahead and do what I've done. I'm not special in any way. I don't think any strong words. Any academics are naturally, they become experts in what they do because they invest a hell of a lot of time and they have a passion for it. They don't arrive these perfect people, or are they special for it? No, they just have a passion for something and they might find out a lot about it. And that's the same for a coach. But I think a coach can be, if they want to, be more than, I'm just going to go and deliver. That's why I say they can be a researcher as well. But I do think a researcher, if you're going to go into that world and try and do the research, I do think you should be applied as well. Like, for me to go into that environment, would coaches allow me to just mic them up and be with them if I wasn't able to coach with them? I don't know. But I believe that's what's allowed me to do what I've done. I wouldn't have got through anything of what I've done of recent if it hadn't have been for the support of others. And I feel like that, as a coach, for me to get better, I need the support of others. We need to create an environment that just supports. And I've been really lucky to have that. And that's what I'd hope to give to other coaches wherever I work.
What a way to finish it.
But this has been brilliant. I'd love to do a follow-up as well, because I think this area is going to get a lot of interest from coaches.
Maybe, as I say, it's going down the route of, look, this is what I've said I've done, and maybe I actually give the reasoning more behind it. Here's the research behind it and what we know from the past and what we're going to look to do in the future. And I actually, like I said, this might be the follow-up to make the coach the researcher. Well, here's the papers. Go find it out.
Yeah. Brilliant. Top class. Sean, thank you so much.
No worries, pal. We'll speak soon, yeah?